Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second SFI webinar this year. In case you missed our first webinar on SFI chain of custody, I'm just going to go back to that intro slide really quickly. In case you missed our first webinar on SFI chain of custody, please visit our SCS Resource Center online. Today, we're talking about Indigenous engagement and forest certification. Welcome again. SCS Global Services is a leader in third-party certification, consulting, and standards development. We have been certifying sustainable forests since 1993, and we are accredited to all forestry standards, including SFI, PEFC, FSC, and SBP. SCS Global Services works with over 15,000 clients in 125 countries, and has audited more than 30,000 certificate holders. SCS Global Services has auditors in every major market around the globe. SCS has spent the last 40 years delivering on our role as a neutral third party. Our proactive customer service, avoidance of conflict of interests, and quality assessments delivered by science professionals is how we have continued to grow, innovate, and contribute to a healthy planet and thriving economy that works for all. I'm Lindsay Malden, Sales Executive for Forestry Programs here at SCS Global Services. And with me today, I have Miriam Swafford, our Director of Social Impact here at SCS. Miriam, would you be so kind to introduce yourself? Miriam, we can't hear you.
My apologies for that. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's my pleasure to chat with you all about forestry certification generally and SFI certification specifically, and how that helps you engage with your stakeholders and rights holders, specifically Indigenous and First Nations right holders. Give you a little bit of background about myself. As Lindsay mentioned, I'm the Director of Social Impact here at SCS Global Services. And that means I work across a lot of our different certification programs, but I've been engaged in corporate social responsibility and forestry certification for most of my 15 years working in this space. And I focused on real stakeholder engagement. I've worked on palm oil, pulp and paper, food and agriculture and manufacturing industry. So I really bring this like broad network of folks working globally and connections with folks working on the ground to help our teams who are working internationally and locally based to connect with the right folks to understand what local laws are, local customs are, and how to directly engage those folks that are your neighbors or rights holders on your properties and things like that. My background is in the civil society sector, and I've worked in policy advocacy and communications and stakeholder engagement sort of throughout my career. My background's in international development and social change. And it's so nice to be with you guys today. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Paul to tell you a little bit more about himself.
Thank you, Miriam.
Awesome. Thanks, Miriam. Thanks, Lindsay. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. It is really wonderful to be here with you. My name is Paul Robitaille, and I am the Sustainable Forestry Initiative's Senior Indigenous Relations Advisor. So what that means is I work with our team throughout SFI and our network right across North America and quite often around the world to help build and lead our different policies, programs, and partnerships as they relate to Indigenous rights recognition and relationship building. And I'm really honored to be able to share a few of those with you today. I also just want to quickly acknowledge that I'm joined here by a number of my teammates at SFI who are here to answer your questions and just help you navigate and connect with different links to resources that might be of interest. We have Jason Metnick on the line who oversees SFI's standards and supply chain partnerships. relationships, Mira Williamson, who is one of our really amazing team members on the communications team, who does a whole lot of forest-focused storytelling. Dina Sinaway, another one of our Indigenous relations advisors, as well as Annie Perkins, who does some amazing work with the green building community. So we have a wealth of knowledge, and please put your questions in and feel free to connect with any of us.
Thank you, Paul and Miriam, and thank you to the SFI team for being here as well. So today we are talking about Indigenous communities and forestry certification. And after this year's SFI annual conference, I feel inspired by what I heard overall. And a lot of the content this year was about Indigenous relationships, reconciliation, and community building. It was so great to hear from the Mittagooq Solutions and learn about their partnership with Weyerhaeuser and hear so many other stories this year. Thank you to SFI for providing that platform this past May. In today's webinar, we're going to dive deeper into this subject and talk about why forestry certification and relationship building matters, what SFI is doing for the advancement of Indigenous rights and recognition through certification. We're going to talk about relevant SFI programs and services, and we'll discuss the benefits of certification and why your company wants to work with SCS. Let's go. So why does forestry certification matter? It creates an opportunity to tell your sustainability story. And that could be your certificate itself, or the audit report, or being able to showcase your successes in your annual ESG report. Certification helps companies analyze their internal operations from a neutral third-party perspective. And this often results in cost and time savings internally. Certification allows for community building opportunities, stimulates local economies, and allows entrance into the sustainable products market. And finally, certification provides a place to create solutions. And what issues might we try to solve for? Well, these are everyday issues for many forestry companies, and some touch points include employment, for example, finding qualified loggers and truck drivers, understanding or accessing the required training for Native American heritage sites, or archaeological discovery engagement with your local tribal community. Within certification, there's stakeholder consultations, which can be difficult if there's no existing relationship that has been developed with your stakeholders and rights holders. And these are just some examples of what might be going on in your local area. So let's discuss why relationships matter. In forestry, there are just so many frequent interactions with neighbors, community members, stakeholders, and rights holders. And you're going to see the same people every day, and forestry is often family-owned and operated, which makes these relationships generational. Relationship building develops understanding, and that later turns into trust. So if you know where I'm coming from and I know where you're coming from, we can start to work together respectfully. There are so many practical reasons for agreement on issues. For example, in the case of fire, which is all too common now, we need to be able to depend upon each other to protect our natural resources. And in terms of climate change, UNESCO has published several studies on the relationship between Indigenous knowledge and climate change adaptation. And they are saying that Indigenous knowledge has allowed people to thrive through changing climates for generations. And the Climate Atlas of Canada published an article featuring renowned Inuk author Silawat Cloutier, who describes climate change as a world out of balance. And not only an imbalance within the environment, but a deeper imbalance within ourselves and mainstream societal values and behaviors. And she says, Indigenous knowledge carries ancient and intergenerational wisdom that is flexible, fluid, and adaptive as it evolves through relationships with the land and other beings. This knowledge evolves from and is responsive to the natural world, which makes it ideal for developing and advancing meaningful climate solutions. And finally, relationship building supports common objectives like clean water, clean air, and lasting natural resources. So, Paul, can you tell us about what SFI is doing to advance Indigenous rights and relationship building?
I can certainly do my best. So I am really pleased to really just, I would say today, skim the surface of some of the many different ways that SFI works with our network throughout the forest sector to be able to support Indigenous rights rights recognition and relationship building. Just making sure I'm able to advance the slides here. Just having a quick. Oh, I don't seem to be able to. There we go. Perfect. So with that, like I said, there is a lot, and there's not a lot of time, unfortunately. So I am going to do my best to walk us all through some of those ways, both through the SFI standard as well as all the different programs and services that we're able to bring and make available to our network. But as we're going, I'm sure you're going to have questions. I'm sure you're going to want to learn more, and I really do encourage you to place those into the questions box, as we have some really great folks from our team who can really help support you in getting that information and getting the answers that you're looking for. I do recognize that not everyone is going to be familiar with SFI. So for those that aren't, SFI is a North American nonprofit organization that really is on a mission to advance sustainability through forest-focused collaboration. Now, we do that in a ton of different ways, but probably the best known way is through our SFI standards, SFI certification. So as you'll see on the slide here, SFI works with our network throughout North America and around the world to develop different standards that apply to every facet of sustainable forest management. What I have on the screen here is an overview of our forest management standard, for example. And as you see, that standard is built around a framework of different topics and different objectives that we feel really are fundamental to sustainable forest management. Everything from conservation of biological diversity to protection of special sites to climate and fire smart forestry, community engagement, and of course, Indigenous rights recognition and relationship building. All sorts of different things that we feel are going to help to create a really strong framework for forest sector organizations to follow within their practices and help us all really advance sustainability in forestry together. Now, as Lindsay and Miriam both mentioned, Indigenous peoples have unique rights and relationships with the forest that really do set them apart from other so-called stakeholder groups, things like rod and gun clubs, and really do make Indigenous peoples essential partners in sustainable forest management. So when SFI was developing and updating our standards, we really felt, and our network felt, that it was important to really give that recognition to those unique rights of Indigenous peoples at the highest level of our standard. And that's an objective. And although, the exact rights that Indigenous peoples hold, the ways that those are implemented or sort of come to bear within sustainable forest management are going to look different depending on where you are, say between Canada and the United States, public and private land, places where there are treaties and places where there are not. We really do feel that there are certain fundamental actions, certain fundamental components that really should help to inform and advance any type of sustainable forest management. And that's really what Objective 8 is all about. So what are some of those different pieces? The first one really does start at the governance level, where all SFI certified organizations are required to develop and implement a policy to commit to recognizing and respecting Indigenous peoples' rights. And then they are required to make those written policies publicly available, really as that transparent, right, message into the world that this is something important to yourself as a certified organization, as well as to the sector as a whole, right, and that SFI community. So it all starts with that, and that really is the first part of Objective 8 in our standard. The next piece, once that policy is in place, is to work throughout your organization, both with personnel and contractors, to create and implement a training program so that you're not just saying that you're committed to respecting Indigenous people's rights, but you really do have the knowledge and skills internally to be able to bring that commitment to life, right? Backing up that commitment with real learning and hopefully action. So what does that action look like? Well, first, it really does involve identifying the Indigenous peoples within your operating area, within your forest tenures, whose rights, whose unique and protected rights may be affected by those sustainable forest management activities. Then once those peoples are identified, the next thing our standard and objective require are that you would then find ways to understand what those rights are that the Indigenous peoples do in fact hold. And again, that's going to look different depending on where you are. Often, whether it's within places like Canada or the US, public or private land, treaty or non-treaty territory. But that exploration is very important so that by the time you get to the point of implementing a program, right, taking real action to ensure that those rights are respected, again, you are doing so from a place of real information and knowledge so that you can do it in the best and most respectful possible way. Now, of course, rights recognition is a really important part of it, but as Lindsay spoke as well, there's also the relationship focused aspect. So Objective 8 of our standard really does have several measures in place that are designed to simply foster relationship and foster respectful relationship. So what are those different components that are baked in? First, it is really, taking the time to understand and then communicate with Indigenous peoples through their self-determined representative institutions, right? Much like any of our organizations has certain channels that, we hope to communicate through, right? Certain people with certain approvals. Indigenous communities and governments are no different. So it's important that when we engage in something as important as sustainable forest management, that we are doing it in the right way. And that does involve speaking to the right people, but also speaking in the right ways and communicating using appropriate protocols that really do respect those Indigenous nations, as well as the different regulations and policy frameworks that are in place within your jurisdictions that do underlie sustainable forest management. Additionally, the SFI standard and Objective 8 do require that organizations understand and respect Indigenous people's traditional forest-related knowledge. And I thought Lindsay did a really great job of touching on some of the benefits that can come from doing so. Additionally, certified organizations need to identify and protect important sites to Indigenous peoples, whether they're culturally important, economically important through the use of non-timber forest products, right, or other, different sacred or important uses that Indigenous peoples may have. And then within all of that, enable opportunities for Indigenous rights holders to review forestry plans and practices. Now, we hope that through all these facets, that we can form those relationships. So when conversations need to happen around difficult issues, right, very important issues, there is that basis of understanding, hopefully that basis of trust. And we think that can go a very long way. But SFI as an organization, our ethos isn't just to kind of tell people what to do, right? Putting standards into the world, hoping to raise the bar in sustainable forest management. We certainly do that, but we are always here and we always make a real effort to not just tell people what to do, but to really help them do it and achieve some of those objectives and hopefully grow in a way that they as an organization can succeed, that their relationships and partnerships can succeed. And that if we can do this at scale throughout, our vast SFI certified footprint, the sector as a whole can succeed. And we do this through offering, in addition to our standard, a whole range of diverse programs and services that we really, do hope will spur investment and promote investment in progressive Indigenous relations throughout the entire forest sector, sort of beyond the letter of the standard alone. And I spoke about, our certification, which, is a very important part of SFI's work, of course. But what a lot of people don't know is that as an organization, we actually have 4 really robust pillars of our work, different teams within our organization that create all sorts of different programs and resources and services to support our network. From standards to our conservation team, to our community team, to education, all supported by a really amazing network of communications professionals that can help to share those sustainability stories that Lindsay spoke about. So I'm just going to spend the rest of my time really doing a quick look through just some of those different programs and services that we feel can really support the SFI network in building meaningful and responsive relationships with Indigenous communities, with Indigenous rights holders in their operating areas, right? That can be paired with that implementation of the SFI standard to really do some incredible things. So the first of those programs and services is the SFI standards themselves. Now, a lot of folks come to our network through forest certification. Again, it's a really important piece of what SFI does and a really incredible vehicle towards creating some positive impact within sustainable forest management. But we often like to let certified organizations know that the different standards that SFI has, whether it's our forest management standard, our urban and community sustainability standard, as well as our small scale module for Indigenous peoples and families, can be used like a program, like a resource that you can actually bring to the table to support your relationships and partnerships with Indigenous peoples. We found a lot of success in current SFI certified organizations working with Indigenous communities and their businesses, to help lift them up and get them certified. And not only does that support certified organizations in increasing their certified, supply chain and fiber base, but it also helps those Indigenous communities and their businesses, really get a foothold in the economy, right? Be able to access new market opportunities and help them grow. So we really encourage you to think creatively about how you can use certification to support broader relationships and broader local prosperity. Another one of the really great sort of streams of programs, though it is multiple programs, are SFI grants. Now, across our different pillars of work, SFI has a variety of granting programs, from our SFI community grants to our conservation grants, as well as our certification readiness support program that members of the SFI network are able to access to support relationships in their local areas and with local communities. Right from community-focused partnerships and projects that just simply help to bring people together in and around the forest, right, and grow understanding, grow shared purpose, and hopefully shared benefit within the forest. But we also offer our conservation grant program that can be used for local forest-based research or forest conservation projects around things like water or biodiversity or climate change. And again, bring different partners in, including Indigenous communities, to leverage things like their traditional knowledge towards the benefit of all. And then certainly our certification readiness program can be leveraged alongside some of those standards to really support Indigenous communities in building the capacity that can help them succeed in certification. Again, we think certification, right, and those market tools are a great vehicle for supporting sustainability in our forests. And we really are here to layer in all these other things that can help us all do even more. The next part of our program suite are all of our career pathways resources. SFI and our sister organizations, Project Learning Tree and Project Learning Tree Canada, have a whole array of different programs and services that can really support young people and folks from the communities that we interact with in exploring and succeeding in forest sector career pathways, hopefully building a diverse and resilient workforce that can benefit us all in sustainable forestry. Now that runs from green jobs wage matching programs to mentorship cohorts to employment skills training, scholarships for young people to come to our annual SFI conference, as well as a variety of career resources, including an Indigenous specific voices guide that can help Indigenous youth see themselves in current forest sector professionals in all sorts of different career pathways, and hopefully, get inspired to apply for a job and try one out for themselves. And then we also have, I think I might have gone one too far. Oh, that's okay. We also have a whole bunch of training resources specifically for SFI certified organizations. Now, as you'll remember when I was speaking about Objective 8, one of the really important pieces of that objective was providing training to personnel and contractors so that they are competent and knowledgeable to be able to recognize and respect Indigenous people's rights and hopefully build really progressive, meaningful relationships. And we're really proud to have worked with our partner, Sioux College, which is an accredited academic institution, to create a series of 9 sector-specific, self-paced online courses that forestry professionals are able to take to be able to really learn about a variety of Indigenous specific issues, starting with just simply how to identify Indigenous rights holders in your territory, how to communicate respectfully, how to identify and respectfully utilize traditional forest-related knowledge, how to build a diverse and resilient workforce that's inclusive to Indigenous peoples, and so much more. And these are all available. You can actually access them today. They're available to anyone. And SFI certified organizations can actually get a 40% discount on all of them. So again, this is just one of those initiatives that shows, we're trying to raise the bar through our standard, but also here every step of the way to support your success, because we really do believe that, a rising tide lifts all. And, finally, we also have probably our best resource and service, which is an incredible team. I mentioned Dina Sinaway is on the call today, but we actually do have a whole range of incredible Indigenous relations professionals, all the way from those who understand small-scale forest sector business development, to community development, to youth engagement, to forest-focused storytelling, who are here to support our network in ways that are going to help them build and advance their own relationships. So as I have invited you a few times, and I'll invite you again, reach out at any time if you're interested and want to learn more, if you would like to partner with us, if you would like to leverage some of our services and programs to advance your own relationships, because that's what we're here for. We are really here to foster collaboration, to put resources out into the world, to raise that bar and hopefully advance sustainability together. So I really appreciate it, and I look forward a little later to be able to answer some questions that you have.
Paul, thank you so much for that just overview of SFI and some of the things that you guys are doing there to advance Indigenous rights and engagement. And Miriam, turning to you and SCS, can you tell us about some of the benefits of certification and why companies want to work with SCS?
Absolutely. And yes, thank you again, Paul, and to the whole SFI team for really thoughtful engagement about what are both Indigenous and First Nations communities' needs in interacting in the forestry space, as well as forestry companies who encompass some of those communities as well. What are their needs, and how do we improve those interactions in order to create a more sustainable forestry sector and a more sustainable world? And really, that's like how I came to all of this work, right? I was committed. I love forests. And I have been very fortunate to be able to work my entire career in helping to create a more sustainable world, I hope. I made a choice a really long time ago that I wanted to work within systems in order to improve them. And that's why I think certification is so important, right? When we bring companies into a certification process, we help them along a continuous improvement ladder in order to understand how they get from a small wood manufacturer to somebody that has really strong relationships with their community and also has a business plan that is supporting community development and long-term environmental protection, as well as a continuous development of this business, because all of these stakeholders and rights holders are invested in the success of the business, and the business is invested in their success. Okay, so I'll get off my soapbox about why I believe in certification writ large. I get asked that a lot by some stakeholders, maybe all the way to the left of Greenpeace, who are like, you should never talk to some of these terrible companies that are destroying the earth. And I'm like, you guys are doing one thing, and you are making space for all of us that work in certification to help companies reach a higher bar and grow to that. So let's talk about that. Getting certified to SFI really helps each of these forestry organizations gain entry into global markets for certified sustainable forest products, because SFI certifications are compliant with the internationally recognized PEFC standards. So one of the ways certification is really beneficial is that your clients that are buying your products are going to want you to have certification to prove what you're doing throughout your supply chain and harvesting processes. And so you get access to those markets by having SFI certification. It also helps to really drive sustainable wood production in North America, which we know there is so much wood production happening here, and we have tremendous opportunities to improve those processes. It's really ensuring, as Lindsay spoke about earlier, that we have proper procedures in place. So we have responsible forest management, and in order to make like reputable claims that you are meeting the SFI standard. And it's really going to minimize the negative impacts and maximize the possible impacts of including economic, social, and environmental within your decision-making business management structure. It's really going to reduce your risks and identify additional steps that can be taken in order to further reduce those risks. And it's going to demonstrate your commitment to sustainability to all of your stakeholders. One of the ways I like to think about certification is sort of what are all the pressures or opportunities to meet your stakeholders' needs. So we know investors in companies are demanding certification in order to know that they're making responsible investments. Increasingly, certification is table stakes in order for you to get major investment from banks or international institutions, or even your local financiers. We also know that like increasingly markets are closed to non-certified wood products because there is so much risk involved in potentially enabling illegal harvesting. So we know that regulatory systems are requiring more certifications, which SFI can help you comply with, help you understand, and help you integrate into your business. And then we also know that consumers are demanding more information about where their products are coming from. As there's this greater global connectivity, we're all much more aware of the potential negative impacts of our supply chain. And so, as both Lindsay and Paul talked about, getting SFI certified, it gives you the ability to make reputable claims that you can do on package or on your bill, on your deliveries or anything like that, so that everybody knows that you are meeting this standard and has a clear understanding of what that is. So let me tell you a little bit more about the benefits of working with SCS. My slide's just going to take a second to change, I think. But I'll tell you a little bit more. I'll give you a little more personal anecdote while we wait for that. Oh, great. So as I mentioned, I come to SES. This is the first time I've worked for a for-profit company. And part of what brought me to SES is not just my belief in working within systems to improve our economy so that it benefits more humans, but because I saw SES as a key player in this space and one that was intrinsically committed to that mission. So SES is a benefit corporation, meaning we are required by law to take into account the environmental, social, and financial impacts of our business. And forestry is really a cornerstone of our business. We have more than 30 years of forestry certification expertise, and we're sort of one of the first certifiers in the FSC program. And the great news is we bring all of this forestry certification expertise and international networks and local networks to bear to help offer you SFI certification, and that can easily be bundled with FSC certification. As I mentioned, we've got a huge network of experienced auditors that know the local applications of these international standards. So Paul was talking a little bit about how there is different requirements based on if you are in Canada versus if you're in the US. There's different requirements, whether if your rights holders have a treaty or not. Our international network of auditors really knows how to ask the right questions to get to the answers of like what is the appropriate applicability of these standards to your business operation. And then we also, much of our staff is full-time staff, so we're really reliable and responsive in any time zone that you're working in. We are excited to engage with you on your sustainability journey, if it's just beginning or you've been working towards certification and been certified for many years. So I invite you to get SFI certified and to use SES as your partner to receive SFI certification. And Lindsay, I'll turn it back over to you to tell them a little bit more about how they can do all of these things and access these great resources that Paul and SFI was talking about.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And thank you to Paul as well. And I just really appreciate this open and forward conversation about Indigenous communities and relationship building. And yes, I will definitely get to the part where we talk about what to do next. And since we do have a few extra minutes, we have a few questions that have come up in our questions box. And the first question is going to be for Paul. So Paul, can you tell us if SFI is planning on expanding the training materials that you mentioned to include US-based communities or even communities based in Mexico?
That's a great question, and thanks, yeah, for asking it. The short answer is yes. When we designed that training series with our partner Sioux College, we really focused on thinking as expansively as possible about all of those different facets of SFI's objective aid that we could put in place as a base for training, because we recognize this might be a change for some. They might not have had these programs, so we wanted to make sure there was something there. That said, admittedly, some of that content is more or less Canadian focused, and we've realized that as a gap. The vast majority, it really does transcend borders. Respectful communication is probably respectful communication, at least, the principles of it, no matter where you are. It's going to look different from place to place, even within a specific state or even between communities. But those principles we think will resonate. Our next step in the series really is working with our network, working with experts to be able to expand that, to bring in more diverse geographic examples, to be able to even take those online units and adapt them into more field-based resources that a logger, for example, that doesn't have access to the internet or the computer all day, or 3 hours, in some cases, to sit down and go through the unit, can still benefit from that learning in ways that are going to be relevant to them. So yes, we really do hope to expand that and are actually in the process of doing so right now.
Great to hear. Thank you so much. And the next question we have is for Miriam. Miriam, what does SCS currently provide for auditor training? You mentioned in the webinar, we talked about SCS's full-time staff and some of the things that are going on. Does SCS provide any training for auditors?
Yeah, so we have a whole host of trainings and sort of calibration that we provide to all of our auditors across all of the standards that we work on. But SCS has an internationally recognized forestry training program for auditors, and we also have a number of other courses internationally recognized. For example, one that I run is around interviewing. Our auditors, the sort of 3 things that they do when they're going on an audit, the ways they obtain information, is they're reviewing records and policies. They are observing while they're in the field, so they're looking at your stand of trees, they're looking at your sawmill, and then they're also interviewing management and workers to better understand how your policies are being applied. And that process can be incredibly complex, and depending on the cultural diversity represented by these different actors, and if there are any, I'm going to say, specific issues of harassment or pay discrepancy going on, we want our auditors to feel empowered and have the knowledge and support to know how to investigate these things appropriately, so that we are maintaining positive relationships with both your staff as well as, your management staff as well as your workers, to better understand these issues. Because SCS is the neutral third party in these conversations. We are not going to tell you how to solve these issues, but we are going to identify where you might have places where you're out of compliance with the SFI standard. So our auditor trainings really help to make sure that our staff that are on the ground that are interacting with you have the latest and greatest skills and best practices in order to do that in culturally appropriate ways, which I think is a really good tool that's also like the SFI trainings. I'm actually very excited. I was telling Paul this the other day. I'm really excited to take some of the SFI trainings and understand how and what of those we should be giving to our auditors in order to grow their competency in what their expectations are of the organizations that they're auditing.
Awesome, great to hear. And finally, we have one last question that is open to anybody who would like to comment. And this question is from a company in the US South. And the question is, what can our company do to engage with Native Americans when we have not yet made this a priority? And this is probably like a whole separate webinar, something that we could talk about for another solid hour. But, we mentioned a lot of tools, we mentioned a lot of resources. What would be, maybe break it down to like your first step in this process?
I would say before you engage, you need to prepare yourself for engage. One of the biggest hurdles, it sounds like you've already crossed it, which is just identifying the need, right? Identifying the importance and building some of that internal will. But like I laid out when going through that process, we have an objective aid around first identifying the rights holders, identifying their rights, and then developing that program. We laid it out, very deliberately in that way so that organizations who this might be newer to, who this might be a big leap for, can really take those sequential steps and work themselves to the point where once you start those conversations, you really are prepared for them to go in a positive direction. So if you haven't, yet done some of that outreach, if you haven't done some of that learning, I would encourage you to, potentially take our Acknowledging Traditional and Treaty Territory course so that you can start to identify some of those Indigenous peoples' rights holders in your operating areas. That then opens the door so you can learn about those nations, those communities, their governance structures, their priorities, their histories, and the different things that really might speak to them when you come to the table. And then through that work, through that capacity building, you'll hopefully be able to start to identify those ways where you can gently knock on those doors, to start some conversations, hopefully, build some shared experience between you and let that grow into a real relationship.
I would just add that sometimes organizations will come to understanding that they have Native American or First Nations stakeholders only when they're going forward and getting a certification. And so SCS is sometimes the first face of representing your company, but we're not representing your company, that those communities engage with. And that's something we have quite a lot of experience with. It's certainly less than ideal, but you don't have to wait until you have a perfect system before starting the certification process. We are all here, both SFI as an organization and SCS as a company and partner to you, to help you move along this continuous improvement pathway and help point out where there are opportunities for you to continue to grow your business and improve your relationships.
Great. Thank you so much to both you, Paul and Miriam, for joining me on this webinar and taking the time out of your busy and normal work days and lives to plan and prepare for this. And thank you to all of our attendees today for joining us. Again, my name is Lindsay, and my contact information is here on the screen. If you're ready to get started with your forestry certification, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And Paul's information is also on the screen for you as well. So if you're interested in any of those SFI resources or training materials that are available, please don't hesitate to email Paul or reach out with any other questions or comments that you may have. And finally, we do have, another webinar coming this winter on SFI's new urban and community forestry standard. And we're very excited to bring this new standard to life, and we hope that you can join us then for that as well. Okay, and thank you all again.